Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov, get any updates to the forecast, or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391, get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can follow us both on Twitter and on Facebook. Taking a look now at the advisories and warnings that we have out for the state. We'll start off in the southwest where we have 2 freezing rain advisories. For the Kuskokwim Delta, that one is in effect from midnight tonight until 6 p.m. Friday, and that is from Bethel and to the east. Our other freezing rain advisory is for the lower Kuskokwim Valley. That is in effect from 9 p.m. this evening until noon on Friday, and that is from Sleepmute west. Moving up to the north, we'll start off with the warnings that we have way out west. For St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait coast, we have a winter storm warning for blowing snow in effect, and that is in effect until 9 p.m. on Friday. And then just to the north and north of Kivalina along the coastline there, we have a blizzard warning that is in effect until midnight on Friday. Then way up all the way along the Arctic coastline, we have several advisories out. All of those are winter weather advisories for blowing snow, and they're all out for the same amount of time from 6 p.m. this evening until 6 p.m. on Saturday, all 6 of those. Again, for any additional details, please check our website. Now we can take a look at our satellite imagery. We'll start off in the south. We do have some cloud cover coming up with the southerly flow that we've been seeing impacting all of the Panhandle area, bringing a lot of rain to that area. We have our main low pressure system. It's a little bit hard to see the circulation there, but that low is moving towards the Bristol Bay area, bringing up a lot of southerly flow to places all along the North Gulf Coast. So watch again some extended cloud cover from that system moving out over much of the state, covering all the way up to the North Slope coast. As we move way out to the west, we can notice a lot of northerly flow coming down, bringing in a little bit of colder air to places in the Bering Sea and eventually to the Aleutian Islands. So for our weather for the remainder of the day, colder air coming in from the north, bringing some snow to the Pribilof Islands, but it's still a little bit warmer along the Aleutians. Going to see some rain out there, and rain and snow mix as we get out towards the western Aleutian Islands. Then our main low pressure out over the Alaska Peninsula, bringing in that southerly flow, warmer air to Kodiak Island, some rain expected there, as well as in the Bristol Bay area. But as we move up a little bit to the north in the lower Kuskokwim Valley and out over the Kuskokwim Delta, again we have that snow mixing with some of that freezing rain expected, so watch out for that. But colder as we get further to the north in the Yukon Delta, going to see some snow up there, and then some isolated areas of snow throughout much of the interior, extending out towards the Seward Peninsula as well, and then along that coastline from St. Lawrence Island all the way up to the north and then all the way along the Arctic coastline, going to see those blowing snow conditions. Not a whole lot of new precipitation along the Arctic coast and Brooks Range, but still enough wind to blow the loose snow around. And as we move down to the south, in the south central for Kenai Peninsula into the Anchorage Bowl area, going to see some rain there, and that's going to extend all the way along the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle with the southerly flow bringing up the warmer air and expecting some rain there. Colder still in the Copper River Basin and eastern parts of the Alaska Range, expecting to see some snow. Then for tonight, pretty similar for the Panhandle, that southerly flow with the warmer air continuing to bring rain to those areas. throughout much of the northern Gulf Coast until we get to the Kenai Peninsula, where we're going to expect some snow and a possibility of mixing with some light freezing rain all the way around Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley and out again into the lower Kuskokwim Valley and Kuskokwim Delta. Further to the south around Kodiak and the Bristol Bay area, southerly flow bringing in some warmer air and some rain to those locations. But as we move to the north into the Alaska Range, further into the interior, expecting to see snow up there all the way through the Brooks Range now in some areas along the Arctic coast as well. But enough wind continuing along the Arctic coastline to see those blowing snow conditions throughout the night, and that's going to be true down along the west coast of the state, now extending down into western parts of the Norton Sound as well, those blowing snow conditions. Then as we look out a little bit further to the south and east, going to see some more snow falling down into the Yukon Delta there, and then northerly flow bringing in some snow throughout the Bering Sea, and some of that cold air now making it down to the Aleutian Islands, producing a mix of rain and snow for those locations all the way out through the western Aleutians. As we move into Friday, a little bit lighter for the amount of precipitation out there in the western Aleutian Islands as that front pushes further to the south, but still going to see that rain and snow mix there, and some snow out over the Pribilof Islands. So we move out over the Bristol Bay area, going to see primarily rain there extending down to Kodiak Island, but further to the north in the YK Delta area and extending into the lower Kuskokwim Valley, going to expect to see primarily snow, but the potential for some light freezing rain as well. And all the way up along the west coast, seeing that snow all the way up there, and then some blowing snow conditions continuing through the Bering Strait down to St. Lawrence Island, up along the Arctic coastline, and now we're starting to see some more new snow falling as we move throughout the day on Friday. Snowfall continuing down into northern parts of the interior, but southern and southeastern parts of the interior should be drier from precip until we get down into the eastern Alaska Range and Copper River Basin area, where we're going to see some snowfall there. And still going to see a chance of some light freezing rain, especially as we get closer to the Susitna Valley on Friday, and primarily in the morning hours for all of this freezing rain potential should change over as we move into the afternoon hours. For the Kenai Peninsula and along the Gulf Coast down into the Panhandle, going to see rain with continued southerly flow on Friday, and another system coming up bringing more rain as we move into Saturday, expecting to see that rain make it into the Panhandle as well. And all the way along the Gulf Coast, going to see that rain, and now we have some of that snow pushing a little bit further down into places along the Kenai Peninsula with a rain and snow mix expected there. Snowfall in the Susitna Valley now, as well as the Copper River Basin and into the Alaska Range. But eastern parts of the interior until we get up around Fort Yukon, extending out towards the Bettles area, going to see some snow up there into the Brooks Range as well, and then along the Arctic coast. Now our blowing snow conditions finally starting to diminish in the eastern parts of the Arctic coast, but from Barrow to the west, continuing to see blowing snow conditions that will go down the west coast of the state to around the St. Lawrence Island area. But further to the south now in western parts of the Norton Sound, no longer any blowing snow conditions, but still going to see that snowfall, and that's going to continue into the YK Delta area as well. And then in the Bristol Bay area, colder temperatures finally coming in, going to see a rain and snow mix there as well as along the Alaska Peninsula, and then snow throughout all of the Aleutian Islands on Saturday. Taking a look at our temperatures now, we'll start off in the southeast part of the state. Mid-40s for the most part, colder towards Skagway there, 37 degrees, 42 for Yakutat. And as we move along the coastline, mid-40s for the northern Gulf Coast, 45 for Homer, 45 for Middleton Island as well, 42 for Cordova. Getting colder as we get further inland, 34 for Talkeetna, down to 20 this afternoon for Glen Allen, and then 42 for Kodiak. Taking us into the interior part of the state, you know, it's a little bit warmer there through the park with some of that warmer air overrunning. The higher temperatures or higher elevations are a little bit warmer at some of these low-lying valley locations where we're seeing temperatures in the teens throughout much of the interior. Then through the pass, we do have temperatures at -11, and all along the Arctic coastline below zero there. Wainwright down to -13, Point Lay down to -17 this afternoon. Barrow at -8. Taking us to the west coast of the state, Shishmaref at 32 degrees, Kotzebue at 10 degrees, Kivalina at -2. Down into the Norton Sound area, all around 20 degrees, a little bit warmer there at Nome, 26 degrees. Gamble at 7 degrees this afternoon. Down into the southwest part of the state now, around 20 degrees for the YK Delta for the most part. Bethel there at 19, Kipnik at 23, Antioch 21 degrees. Mid-30s throughout much of the Bristol Bay area, warmer there at King Salmon, 43 degrees. So we move down into the Alaska Peninsula, around 40 degrees there as well. 38 degrees this afternoon for Cold Bay, 41 for Sandpoint. Down into the Aleutian Islands, Dutch Harbor, 38 degrees. Atka at 39 degrees, Shimmy at 35 degrees. St. Paul and St. George both at freezing. Taking a look at our lows for tonight, staying in the mid-30s for the most part throughout the Aleutian Islands, down to 28 for the Pribilofs. As we move into the Bristol Bay area, expecting temperatures to drop down into the mid-30s there. Dillingham down to 36 degrees. In the YK Delta area, staying around the 20-degree mark. Macoriac down a little bit lower to 16 degrees for tonight. Then in the Norton Sound area, as we get closer to the Seward Peninsula, down into the single digits there. Nome down to 9 degrees. As we go into the Kotzebue Sound, dropping below zero there. Kotzebue getting down to -3 degrees for tonight. And then up along the Arctic coast, dropping down well below zero there. -12 for Barrow, -12 for Deadhorse. Kaktovik a little bit warmer, -4 expected low tonight. Into the interior, temperatures steadily raising for those lows as we get further to the south, with Eagle at 24 degrees for a low tonight. Arctic Village down to 0, and then down in the south central part of the state, dropping down to around freezing for most locations, warmer along the coastline. Cordova getting down to 40 degrees, Homer down to 36, as well as Seward. And then down in the Panhandle, dropping down to around 40 degrees for the most part, a little bit warmer as we get further to the south. Highs for tomorrow, not a whole lot of change in the southeast with all that southerly flow coming up, but getting up into the mid-40s, with the exception a little bit in the lower 40s as we get further to the north. Juneau getting up to 40 degrees tomorrow. In the south central area, we do have temperatures getting up into the upper 30s. Colder for Glen Allen, only up to 30 degrees there. In the interior, getting up into the mid-20s to mid-30s. Colder as we get further to the north, only in the teens up there. For Yukon up to 17 degrees. Bettles up to 21 degrees. Arctic Village up to 18, 7 through the pass, and then right around 0 for highs tomorrow, with Wainwright getting to 0 as well as Kaktovik. Barrow only getting up to around -3. Single digits for much of the Kotzebue Sound area, getting up into the 20s for the southern parts of the Norton Sound, up to around 30 for the YK Delta, up to around 40 for the Bristol Bay area, then up around 40 for the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands as well. 33 degrees expected high for St. Paul. Taking a look at our aviation forecast now, widespread MVFR conditions throughout much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, with some of those IFR conditions making their way along the coastline and to the Alaska Peninsula. Along the Arctic coast, we're going to see some IFR conditions there as well, and in northern parts of the interior, including the Brooks Range. Then down into the Alaska Range and south central, MVFR conditions expected with some isolated areas of IFR, and then with all the rain in the southeast, expecting to see some IFR conditions there. For the passes, AKwx should be MVFR for tomorrow, as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill will both be down to IFR conditions, as will Rainy Pass and Windy Pass. Then Isabel Pass expected to be up to marginal for tomorrow. Mentasta Pass should be the same. Tanita Pass will be down to IFR, however, as well as Portage. And then Chilkoot and White are both expected to be IFR for tomorrow. Taking a look now at our freezing levels, we do have some warmer air coming in from the south, and some of that warmer air overriding our surface freezing level, which is increasing that potential for some freezing rain in locations in the southwest part of the state. And then the other part of the freezing line going off into the Bering Sea and heading out to the west. Taking a look at our icing, way out in the western Aleutian Islands, between 6,000 and 9,000 feet there. As we move closer towards mainland Alaska out in the eastern Aleutian Islands, above 8,000 feet, dropping down to above 7,000 feet as we get closer to the Norton Sound area, and then extending off into northern parts of the state, nearest to the eastern Brooks Range, above 7,000 feet there, above 7,000 feet in the south central as well, and again above 7,000 feet for the Panhandle area. Taking a look at our jet stream for tomorrow. Southwesterly flow around 75 knots going out over the Panhandle. A little bit further to the south, getting up to as high as 100 knots out of that southwesterly direction. As we move up, mainland Alaska, not a whole lot of activity, but just off the Arctic coastline, westerly component of the jet, up to as high as 110 knots there. And then just missing the western Bering Sea, we do have flow out of a northerly direction around 70 knots. And just to the south of the western Aleutian Islands, westerly flow around 120 knots, getting up to as high as 130. Dropping down to 9,000 feet out over the Bering Sea, northerly flow dominates. anywhere from 20 to 30 knots, the strongest in the central Bering and central Aleutian Islands area. And as we move out to the east, southerly flow anywhere from 20 knots up to as high as 40 knots, strongest out over the Copper River Basin. As we move up to the northern parts of the state off the Arctic coastline, easterly flow up to as high as 35 knots there. Then we have some stronger winds out of a southerly direction, 50 knots, heading towards the Panhandle, dropping down to 30 knots, but then picking back up to around 50 as we move off back into Canada. Down to 3,000 feet, pretty similar flow pattern out of a southerly direction, 45 knots, dropping down to 25 as we get closer to the Panhandle. Out over mainland Alaska, southerly flow, primarily anywhere between 25 to 35 knots, but stronger as we get just off the Arctic coastline out of an easterly direction up to as high as 50 knots there. And as we look out over the Bering Sea, we have northerly flow coming in as strong as 50 knots, but dropping down over the Bering to as high as 35 knots out over the central Bering and central Aleutian Islands, and then dropping all the way down to around 15 knots out of that northerly direction by the western Aleutian Islands. Finally, we'll take a look at our turbulence. Below 4,000 feet, we have some turbulence expected for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands for tomorrow with some of those stronger winds with that northerly flow that we saw a little bit earlier. And then from the St. Lawrence Island area all the way up along the Arctic coastline, below 4,000 feet expected with the stronger winds just off the coastline, some of them making it along the coast and then down through the Bering Strait down towards St. Lawrence Island. We are also expecting some lighter turbulence below 5,000 feet for Kodiak Island. And then with the stronger winds impacting the southeast part of the state, below 6,000 feet, some turbulence expected for the Panhandle. And we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
The Great Star and Constellation Shootout.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight. You may not know this, but astronomers can be kind of competitive.
A friendly, nerdy kind of competitive. Often, when they get together at conferences, they play the Great Star and Constellation Shootout. Basically, the astronomers sit in a planetarium, turn off the lights, put the stars on the ceiling, and start naming stars and constellations.
They point at each object with a red laser, give the name, and if correct, move on to the next round. If they're wrong, or can't find a star or constellation they know, they're out.
The last astronomer standing, or, well, sitting, wins. So, James and I are going to go head-to-head for your entertainment this week.
That's right. Two titans at the peak of their stargazing abilities, Dean with his knowledge of obscure star names,
and James with his constellation connoisseurship.
Connoisseurship?
That's not a word, is it?
Nope.
Anyway, let the Great Star and Constellation Shootout begin.
Okay, are you ready, Four Eyes?
Bring it on, Star Geek. We've got our skies set to 10 p.m. looking east. Here you can find Leo the Lion, recognizable by the backward question mark of stars for his head and a triangle of stars for a rear end.
Correct. And Leo's brightest star is called Regulus, meaning Little King.
Correct, for the king of the beasts. And there is Algeba, a nice double star.
Above Algeba is Aldefera.
And that super bright thing is the planet Jupiter.
And just rising in the east is Denebula, the tail of Leo the Lion.
Okay, so far so good.
Now we're facing south at 10 p.m. and we can see Orion high in the sky.
Below him is the rabbit constellation called Lepus.
Above Orion's right shoulder is Taurus the Bull.
And to the right of Lepus is the constellation Eridanus. Okay, James, since you picked Orion, I challenge you to a star lightning round.
Ooh, goody.
Okay, we're zoomed in on Orion and we're going to name stars. Go.
Rigel.
Bellatrix.
Misa.
Alnitak.
Alnilam.
Mintaka.
Safe.
Betelgeuse.
Ah, good play, Mr. Regas.
We could be here all night. Okay, now we're facing southeast at 9 p.m. There's Sirius, the brightest star in the sky.
Who's part of the constellation Canis Major.
There's the bright yellow star Procyon,
also known as the little dog star in the constellation Canis Minor.
There's the yellow-orange star Pollux,
and blue-white Castor above it.
who are the heads of the constellation Gemini the Twins.
Okay, What's that star above Procyon?
Gomesa, the other star in Canis Minor. I know that constellation is a real hot dog. What's the star between the Gemini twins and Orion's Betelgeuse?
Alhena, the heel of Pollux. What's Canis Major's head star called?
That's Mersam. Ooh, here's a toughie. What's the faint constellation between Canis Major and Canis Minor?
That's Monoceros, the unicorn, a constellation invented by Dutch cartographer Petrus Plancius in the 17th century to fill in the empty space.
You're good, Albury, very good.
You've proven to be a worthy opponent.
Finally, we're facing north at 10 p.m. and we see Polaris, aka the North Star, about halfway up in the sky.
Polaris marks the tail of the Little Bear, the constellation Ursa Minor.
It's also part of the asterism called the Little Dipper. The stars marking the end of the Little Dipper's spoon are called Kochab
and Firkad.
To the right is Ursa Major, a huge constellation that contains the stars in the Big Dipper,
which includes the stars Alcade,
Mizar,
with a tiny little star above it called Alcor, barely visible to the naked eye.
Then there's Alioth,
faint little Megrez,
Phecta,
Merak,
and Dubi. Well, we just correctly identified a heck of a lot of stars and constellations.
Yep, and I bet we have a lot more we could name if we only had more time.
What do you say we call it a tie?
Sounds good.
If we can learn all these stars and constellations in the sky, you can too. Just follow our simple advice and keep looking up.
Welcome back. Taking a quick look at the sea surface temperatures. We have some of our colder temperatures and making it down from the north. And with that northerly flow expected, these will slowly move to the south. Looking at our ice edge now, we have our sea ice pushing down further to the south as well. Expecting to have that move with the northerly flow further to the south, but not expecting it to make it to St. Paul Island. Less than a 10% chance of that this season. Then out in the Cook Inlet area, some sea ice still remaining there, but with the warmer temperatures that we've been seeing in the Cook Inlet area, expecting that to be continuing to diminish. For the southeast part of the state, for our main marine forecast, southerly flow for the most part, 30 knots out over much of the Gulf, up towards the Yakutat, around 15 knots there with some gusts out of Disenchantment Bay. And then we have in the inside waters, southerly flow around 25 knots there. Seas out in the Gulf getting up to as high as 18 feet. Then on Saturday, southerly flow continuing 25 to 40 knots. Seas as high as 22 feet now. Closer towards Yakutat, southeast flow 20 knots there. Still seeing some of those higher gusts. And it's southeasterly flow in the inside waters 20 to 30 knots. Seas anywhere from 4 to 6 feet. On Friday for the south central, southeasterly flow for the most part 25 to 30 knots. A little bit weaker in the northern parts of Cook Inlet, only around 10 knots there. And then seas 16 to 17 feet out in the Gulf, 4 feet for Prince William Sound, and then as we look out over Shelikof Strait area, around 5 feet there. For Saturday flow, south-southeasterly still, 10 to 15 knots for more of the inside waters there, and then as we look out over the Gulf, southerly flow dominating 15 to 20 knots, dropping down to 10 knots as we get into Prince William Sound. For the Alaska Peninsula, we could see our circular flow pattern around the low pressure, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots, strongest southeast of Chignik out of that southerly direction, 10 to 15 knots out in the Pacific, 2 to 8 feet seas out in the Bering. Then on Saturday, flow becoming more northwesterly in the western locations, around 20 knots. Southwesterly as we push off closer towards Kodiak and Bristol Bay, around 20 knots there as well. Seas in the Pacific, 9 to 10 feet, 5 to 8 feet for the Bering. Then on Friday for the Aleutian Islands, a northerly northwesterly flow, 25 to 30 knots. Strongest seas on the Bering side up to as high as 15 feet, and then way out west, northwesterly flow around 20 knots there. Moving into Saturday, continuing the north-northwesterly flow around 15 knots out west, up to as high as 25 knots as we push out further towards the eastern Aleutian Islands. Seas around 10 feet on the Bering side, up to as high as 9 feet on the Pacific side. Along the west coast of the state, northerly flow, stronger winds, 35 to 40 knots, bringing in some freezing spray, dropping down to around 30 knots as we get further to the south. Seas highest out west up to as high as 16 feet. Then on Saturday, northwesterly flow, 20 to 30 knots, strongest near St. Matthew Island. Freezing spray continued to be expected there, with the highest seas up to around 11 feet near St. Matthew Island as well. Along the Arctic coastline, easterly flow around 30 knots, becoming more northerly as we hug the coastline up to as high as 40 knots out west. As we move into Saturday, pretty similar flow up to as high as 35 knots out west, down to around 25 to 30 knots as we push off towards the east. Quick recap for the state. Southerly flow bringing in a lot of rain to the Panhandle area. Chance of light freezing rain for the Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley areas. But as we move further off to the west, freezing rain advisories for the Kuskokwim Delta and lower Kuskokwim Valley. We have some rain coming up from the south towards Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island. Snow expected throughout much of the interior tonight, with blowing snow conditions way out west. We have some winter storm warning out for the St. Lawrence Island, Bering Coast Strait, and then blizzard warning out north of Kivalina, blowing snow advisories all the way along the northern part of the Arctic coast there. So please check our website for additional details on any of those locations. And then out over the Bering Sea, northerly flow bringing in some isolated snow showers to the Pribilof Islands, and then a rain and snow mix along the Aleutian Islands for tonight. Into Friday, pretty similar northerly flow, rain and snow mix for the Aleutian Islands, snow for the Pribilofs. A low pressure bringing in some rain to Bristol Bay, mixing with snow as we get further to the north in the Kuskokwim River Valley. Some chance of light freezing rain, especially in the morning hours there. Snow expected all the way along the west coast, with the blowing snow conditions remaining way out west and along the Arctic coastline. Snow expected through the Arctic coast, through the Brooks Range and northern parts of the interior, picking up again as we get into the south central, with potential for some light freezing rain in the morning around northern parts of Cook Inlet and Susitna Valley, then rain extending down into the Panhandle, hugging that northern Gulf Coast down to Kodiak Island. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.